Hi everyone, this is TheHande, and welcome to part 2 of my favorite video game characters. If you did not see part 1 to this video, then don't worry, it's not really necessary. But I will state that this video, unlike the previous one, doesn't actually have any kind of unifying theme. The first video was about my favorite characters in platformer games. And today's video really is not about any specific series, and in fact, in one case I would even say that I'm really talking about a character from a singular game and not a series as such. But the first 3 characters that I'm going to be talking about today were ones that I kind of really wanted to talk about in that first video as well, but because I chose to only focus on platformers, they were not featured. So today, I'm going to be talking about my favorite characters in the Monkey Island game series, the Zelda game series, the Gabriel Knight series, and then, finally, Conker's Bad Fur Day. And yes, while Conker technically is a part of a series, I'm going to explain in a minute why I really mean that I'm talking about a character from one specific game. So let's start with the Monkey Island game series. Now, the Monkey Island series has a lot, and I do mean a lot of great characters that I could pick. A lot of fan favorites like Murray, and I even think the main cast of Guybrush, Elaine, and LeChuck are all pretty great characters as well. And the deep lore of this series has countless memorable supporting characters that I could talk about, but today I decided that I was just going to focus on one specific character. Now mind you, I would not say that this character has always been my favorite, but the more I think about it, this character kind of has grown on me over time just because of his resilience and the reason that he just keeps coming back no matter what life throws at him, and that is Stan as Stanman, or better known as Stan the Salesman. Stan has appeared in every single one of the Monkey Island games, which is pretty impressive considering that he is not a main character in the very least. And most of the time, he really is just a means to an end character whom Guybrush needs to talk to at some point to progress the plot. But what I find interesting is just how Stan's character has still gone through quite a bit of evolution over time. In the very first game, The Secret of Monkey Island, Stan was basically nothing but a pirate version of a used car salesman. He's obnoxious, forthcoming, and he wears a garish jacket with a pattern that never moves despite the fact that Stan flails his arms around wildly as a part of his regular animation. And it's important to stress that this was really the full extent of his character in the very first game. He sells Guybrush a crappy boat that he has to take to Monkey Island, and he does get punched in the face by the main villain, but apart from that, that is his relevance for the first game. However, in Monkey Island 2, he then came back selling previously used coffins and funeral attire, giving his character a kind of a morbid sense. He states that he started this business because he wanted to get into a field where displeased customers were less likely to come back and complain. His role in Monkey Island 2 is even more limited. Guybrush literally just traps him in a coffin in this game, where he remains until he is finally released in the third game, The Curse of Monkey Island. In The Curse of Monkey Island, Stan has gone through a bit of a life-changing experience being trapped in the coffin and starts selling life insurance and gets bamboozled by Guybrush, who fakes his own death, manages to get a settlement from his own life insurance policy. And in fact, in the fourth game, this scheme apparently became very popular, which is why Stan stopped selling life insurance and has gone into real estate instead. Now, as you can probably tell between these 4 games, Stan seems to be changing professions pretty willy-nilly with no rhyme or reason, and this is what they really leaned into in his 5th appearance in Tales of Monkey Island, where he's the public prosecutor on Flotsam Island, but also sells merchandise of his various trials. In fact, Tales, for the first time, really decided to incorporate Stan's varied and sordid business ideas into his character, where instead of this being just a jokey way his character keeps being brought back in each of the games, it's now just part of Stan's history that he has always been a sleazy salesman, often not the most honest, and that's why he keeps running into trouble and having to change professions in every game. The law finally catches up to Stan in Part 6, Return to Monkey Island, where in fact you have to actually break Stan out of jail so that he can help you in what is probably his most involved role in the Monkey Island games up to that point. I mean, yeah, it was pretty involved in Tales as well, but now Stan is actually directly helping Guybrush instead of just being an obstacle for him. Then the Legend of Zelda series, and this one was actually kind of a hard one as well. Zelda has a very vast array of characters, and what makes it difficult to really objectively weigh them against them is that in most Zelda games there are no recurring characters because most Zelda games are not direct sequels to each other, and instead feature a completely new cast each time. But after giving it a little bit of thought, I actually did come to the conclusion that one of my favorite Zelda characters is actually Midna from Twilight Princess. Those of you who don't know, Midna is Link's companion character in this game. This is a role that started off in Ocarina of Time with Navi, and in each subsequent Zelda game, going all the way up to Skyward Sword, Link usually has some kind of a companion helping him out and helping him make sense of the world around him in these games. This literally was the role that Navi inhabited in the first game, basically telling the player all about the different creatures and even giving hints to puzzles and such. The role was then taken over by Tattle, who was a little less helpful, and then the King of Red Lions in Wind Waker. Midna, however, is the first of these companion characters who is not just there to help Link all through the game, but rather is actually an integral part of the story. Slight spoiler alert, she is actually the Twilight Princess that is being referred to in the game's title. She starts off as being just kind of a mischievous, helping character, where later revealed that this is not actually what Midna actually looks like, but there's a lot more depth to her character than meets the eye. And also, I just genuinely like the interplay between her and Link throughout the game. She definitely comes off as much more personable than Link's other supporting characters. And especially when you consider, for instance, that Link almost always parts ways with his supporting characters at the ends of the games. In this case, there is actually a little bit more emotional depth to it. Though I'm not gonna front, I still think that scene at the end of Ocarina when Navi just flies off, I always found kind of sad as well. And next we come to another point-and-click adventure game series, this time Gabriel Knight. Gabriel Knight is a very short adventure game series by Sierra Interactive, which encompasses just 3 games plus a remake of the first game. I reviewed all of these games a long time ago, and I also have Let's Plays of all 3. Again, I'm not going to be super fancy with this one. My favorite character from the Gabriel Knight series, the second and third game's second protagonist, Grace Nakimura. Grace is a history student who works at Gabriel's bookstore in the very first game, but then as the game series goes on, she becomes an indispensable partner and helper to Gabriel, as well as a kind of a doomed love interest for Gabriel as well. The reason for this is that Gabriel and Grace have very starkly different personalities. Gabriel from the Gabriel Knight games is pretty much one of the most flawed of all flawed adventure game characters. I mean, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, the guy's a bit of a pig. But hilarious and very personable, which is why these games are so entertaining to play. And of course he is also a Schadenjäger, or a member of an ancient line of ancient evil vanquishers with special powers that are inhabited in the Schadenjäger talisman. Grace's role in these games is usually finding out the history of whatever supernatural threat that Gabriel is going up against, and this is the reason why I really like her. Now, in the first game, you didn't get to play as Grace, and she is really just a supporting character there, trying to keep Gabriel out of trouble as he's trying to investigate the voodoo cult in New Orleans. She only becomes a super active character in Gabriel Knight 2, The Beast Within, where she goes on the trail of the lost Wagnerian opera, which is tied to the last Bavarian king, as well as a bunch of werewolf stuff that's involved in the story. And really, the fact that Grace is really into history stuff is the thing that I kind of like about her. She is, basically just a huge nerd, and, who wouldn't love that? I will admit, though, that in Gabriel Knight 2, Grace was maybe a little overly aggressive at times, and to a point where she honestly comes off quite horrible. She definitely mellowed out for the third game, which was also the first one I played, and which is where I really kind of fell in love with her character because of all of her snide comments, as well as her ability to just cut through the history and the mysteries of the game's plot. In fact, I've even stated this before, that whenever I play Gabriel Knight 3, Grace's parts are usually the ones that are my favorite, mostly because they are so involved with the mysterious Le Serpent Rouge riddle, which is a big chunk of the game's story. And I also find her conflicted relationship with Gabriel a lot more compelling than, say, some of the other adventure game couples out there. Don't get me wrong, Guybrush and Elaine are great, and I think George and Nico also have a great dynamic going on, but there is something a little bit special about Gabriel and Grace, in my opinion. Okay, and then the final character that I'm going to be talking about today is Conker the Squirrel from Conker's Bad Fur Day. Now, like I said, Conker technically does have his own little mini game series, but technically the character that I'm talking about today is a very, very specific iteration of the character. Conker the Squirrel was, of course, first introduced in Diddy Kong Racing, a game that featured a bunch of characters that were intended to appear in their own standalone games somewhere down the line, but the only ones that whoever got around to it were Banjo the Bear, who obviously went on to be in Banjo-Kazooie, and then Conker. And Conker's game originally started off as just a child-oriented 3D platformer in the vein of Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong 64. However, Chris Seaver, the game's director and Conker's voice actor, became a little self-conscious about the fact, especially when he realized that these child-oriented 3D platformers were kind of becoming Rareware's recurring product. And he was starting to become concerned that Conker just wouldn't be able to stand out amongst the competition. Therefore, Conker went through a dramatic transformation during development into a much more adult-oriented title with swearing and adult jokes. And in fact, the game even starts off with Conker being badly hungover. And the game would also feature a lot of gross-out humor, including one of the greatest song sections of all video games. Of course, I'm referring to the Mighty Poop song. Now, the thing I love about Conker, however, is that his ultimate goal is to just go home and take a nap because he's just exhausted from the previous night's events. But he finds himself in continuously more insane and ridiculous scenarios, while also being hunted down by the minions of the Panther King, the game's somewhat vague and irrelevant villain. But all the different weird movie references and silly off-the-hand jokes, as well as I think Chris Seaver's just genuinely very good performance as Conker, is what makes the character so relatable. Conker's Bad Fur Day is one of my favorite Nintendo 64 games, I would argue one of my favorite video games of all time, and Conker really is a weirdly sympathetic character, even if he does occasionally do some very, very mean things to some of the people that he runs into. Alright, but that was part 2 of my favorite video game characters. Tell me, do you want me to maybe discuss some more of my favorite video game characters? Is there a specific game series or game in mind that you would want to hear my thoughts on and what my favorite character might be? Leave those in the comments down below. I'm TheHande back in. See you on the next one.